88 days before the Battle of Fal, the Fal system. The fire from the fleet's engines blotted out the stars. Beyond the tribune's viewports, hundreds of warships slid across the darkness in an interlacing web of plasma trails. Each was moving on a precise arc around its fellows, forming a shifting lattice like an ever-changing orrery. Some were so close that I could see the ogre spines projecting from their backs and bellies. It was an arrangement I had created, placing each element and setting their trajectories in motion. Every ship was in a constant state of readiness, their shields raised and their weapons ready. At another time, such a creation might have pleased me, but it only served to fill my mind with half-formed worries. It had been weeks and nothing had happened. I flicked my eyes back to the battle group commanders that stood in a circle around me. My first sergeant, Raln, stood a little behind me, his helmet in his hand, his face devoid of its normal crooked grin. We stood at the center of a spit of white marble that ran down the center of the tribune's bridge. Black stone walls curved above our heads to a vaulted roof. Round viewports ran the length of the bridge, their armored eyelids open to the void beyond. In the clefts to either side of us, rows of servitors sat bound to machines by thick creepers of cable. The smell of warm wiring and the sound of clicking cogitators filled the air. Human officers paced the long rows, followed by hovering servospheres that projected transparent curtains of data in front of their faces. Beneath my feet, images of mythical beasts inlaid in gold and bloodstone riddled across the marble. The tribune was the product of the Inuit shipyards, and like all ships berthed above that world of night and ice, its master commanded on his fleet. Those that came into his presence stood with him, equal in respect if not rank. It was a principle that appealed to me, but after dozens of councils I sometimes felt the Inuit shipwrights had been kinder to the commanded than the commander. Pertinax completed his report. I nodded thanks and then looked around the circle. Each of those assembled commanded one of the fleet's 24 battle groups. Most of those in attendance were projections, their translucent images rendered in flickering light. Only Tyr, Raln, and the spindle-limbed master of astropaths, Kallio Lezek, were physically present. The council had been like all those that had preceded it. It was quiet, as it had been for weeks. I caught Tyr's eye and saw the old argument growing in the glance. I looked away to the only person yet to give the report. Master Lezek. The old man raised his head at the sound of his name and cocked his head as if to listen. Is there word from Terra?
No, Captain,
wheezed Lezek, the loose skin of his face quivering above his silk-shrouded shoulders.
There has been no word from Terra, or anyone else.
The answer was as expected. We were as deaf and mute as we had been when the storm first spat us out. Thank you, I said, and was about to dismiss the gathering when Lezek took a gulp of air and continued.
We lost another 2 astropaths in our last attempt to send a message through the storms.
The old man paused, breathing hard. I could see the fatigue running through his body. His skin had fever sheen to it, and a drop of blood formed at the corner of his mouth as he spoke.
Fleetmaster, we have lost half the remaining astropaths in the fleet trying to get word to Terra. We cannot continue like this. The storms beat our minds even when we sleep. It is like they are alive, like they...
You will keep trying, I said, a hard edge to my voice. Lezek opened his mouth to speak, but I did not give him a chance. There is nothing more important. Nothing. Lezek was silent for a moment and then nodded. It was a death order. I knew. I was ordering his astropaths to give their lives whether they wished to or not. But there was no choice. and we had all suffered losses in this endeavour. Doing one's duty while bearing loss is the essence of loyalty. Still, I felt the blind man's empty eyes boring into my back as I turned to another commander. "Until next division," I said, and brought my closed right fist to my chest. All of the Imperial fists returned the salute. Lezek simply bowed and shuffled away, looking as if he might fall over at any moment. One by one the projection images blinked out until only Tyr remained. A frown creased his sharp face as he stared at the back of the departing astropath. A sensation of restlessness hung around Tyr even when still. A restrained energy like a predator looking out from the inside of a cage. He was honorable and true, but he bowed in respect to no other than Sigismund the Dorn himself. He was my brother by virtue, and the alterations to our flesh and the oaths we had made, but he would never be a friend. "If you have something on your mind, you should voice it, brother." Tyr gave me an accusing look. I braced myself for renewed debate. Behind me, Ralm moved discreetly away from us, his constant enigmatic grin back in place.
"He has a point, brother,"
said Tyr, looking at where Lezek had stood.
"We cannot continue like this. We must establish communication with Terra."
I said, my voice flat and steady. Tyr nodded, still looking at the spot vacated by the astropath.
"That is true, but that is not what I meant."
He frowned, the scars across his face becoming jagged fissures.
"The Primarch ordered us to Istavan. Word from Terra is vital, but so is the mission."
10 ships, Captain," I said quietly. Tyr winced. Since I had assumed command, he had been arguing that the whole fleet should be trying to find a way through the storms. In his eyes, staying in place and preparing our defenses was a waste of time. After our first conversation, I had agreed that we needed to try to break through the storms. I had given Tyr the responsibility of probing into the warp to try and find a safe passage. 10 ships had been lost over the last weeks, and twice as many had taken damage. The storms had not abated. If anything, they seemed to have increased in ferocity.
"If the whole fleet sought a way out, we would lose more and we would not be able to maintain our readiness. Is that our duty?"
growled Tyr.
"To stay here and wait for an enemy that may never come? Command did not fall to you to delay here while our enemy waits for us beyond the storms."
He gestured at the viewports but kept his gaze on me. I saw something dangerous in the deep center of his eyes. I stepped closer to Tyr, a poised stillness suddenly running through my body. My armor was void-hardened battle plate, less massively plated than Terminator armor, but I still looked down on Tyr.
"I have listened to you."
My voice was low and level.
"I agreed to let you seek a way out. But mastery of the fleet is mine."
Tyr looked about to say something, but I shook my head slowly.
"You could have had command. You are more honored. Sigismund holds you in high regard, as does the Primarch. The decisions I make could have been yours, but they are not. You and the others place this duty in my hands."
Unconsciously, I found I had clenched my hand, the scarred fingers hidden by the enfolding bulk of my power fist.
"You may continue to seek a passage out, but I will not risk more of the fleet or our deployment. This is my command, Captain."
Tyr blinked once and then bowed his head. But when he looked up again, I could still see fire in his eyes. I felt something kindle at the base of my neck, a hot acid sensation that spread through the head and chest. I recognized the feeling anger. Not the focused rage of battle, but the low human sensation. I opened my mouth, but never spoke the words that had formed there. At that moment, the tribune screamed. "We are told that pride is a virtue, but only when bound to humility." I had been ready for an attack. Through the long weeks of watching, drilling, and planning, I had waited for an enemy to show his face. I had expected silent ships drifting on momentum from the system edge, or a blunt mass assault from behind the system's sun. Our disposition accounted for this, as did for any number of other preludes to attack. My plan, though thorough, had not anticipated the unimaginable. Of the many mistakes I made, it is perhaps the easiest to understand, but the most difficult to forgive. It began with the servitors. There were hundreds of them, bound into the ship by interface trunks, and locked in cable cradles and machine niches. As one, they howled. Some vomited data code, as if trying to purge themselves. Others babbled, half-formed words. Those without mouths thrashed in silence. I tried to understand what was happening. Then the psychic wave hit me and pitched me over into a sea of fragmented sensation. I heard crying, jabbering, and pleading in 100 desperate voices. I staggered, my vision swimming with luminous streaks of light and color. I was falling, and the sounds I heard were shards of memory and suffering that were not mine. I was drowning, stinking fluid filling my lungs. I was floating in the void, knowing that I was about to die. I was screaming as an iron-faced figure walked towards me, bladed arms extending. I was shouting into the winds of a storm.
Brother!
The word seemed to come from far away. I opened my eyes. A fever blur edged my vision, and the scream echoed in my ears. There was a face looking at me, the pain of its features an echo of my own. For an instant I saw a ghost, a half-dream of the past meshed with the present. Then I felt a blow jolt my shoulder, hard enough to shake me inside my armor. My senses snapped back into sharp clarity. Tyr was looking at me, a snarl of suppressed pain twisting his thin face. Sweat beaded his skin. Behind him, I could see human officers slumped over sensor dazes or twitching on the floor amongst pool vomit and excreta. Blood dribbled from their eyes and ears, running over static-filled data screens. I could tell by their stillness that some were dead. There was a taste of dry ash and grey rot in my mouth.
Look!
Shouted Tyr, and pointed to where the hollow projection of the fall system turned in the air above us. I looked, and I was shouting for full battle readiness even as my mind processed what I saw. 1,000 energy signals flared and blinked out in front of my eyes. Sensor bursts and auspex sweeps bombarded us, hundreds of them coming from sources that came to life and then vanished. Clustered spikes of data and auspex readouts bloomed and died across display screens on the bridge. It was like watching a phosphor shell scatter sparks across the night sky. The cogitators snarled as they tried to process and assess the sudden squall of data. And all the while the nightmares and visions churned through our minds in a swelling tide. Then it was over. The last energy signals vanished from the hollow projection. The machines went quiet. The servitors slumped at their stations, and the fevered sensations faded. 28 days before the Battle of Thal. The Thal system. They took our fear, but not our doubts. Am I right? Have I misjudged? What will happen? The questions hammered on me, and I bore them in silence. That is the necessity of command, that you hold doubt within. You cannot look unto others for assurance, because you are their surety. You cannot share your doubts, lest they spread like a withering disease through muscle. You are alone. Sometimes I wonder if the Primarchs feel this, if decisions eat at their thoughts as they do mine. I had been drilling with my company for hours. Normally, I find calm in the repetition of such practice, but the questions repeated in my mind. What if the storms did not abate? Should I change my plan? What would Sigismund have done?